So a little bit of background about myself. So I'm an information security professional. I've been doing this for a long time. I've got a degree in a degree in the information security space. I've got every major accreditation in this space, everything from certified information security manager all the way down to certified ethical hacker. But I've been in CISO multiple times throughout multiple organizations. Yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
It's great. Excellent. Well, thanks for being here, Stas, and going through this with us. Really, the goal here is we're just going to walk through what it looks like to set up a proper information security program, the elements that should be considered, and have a discussion point around that. Any questions that anyone has, please jump in. We want to make this as interactive as possible and as valuable as possible for especially for your time. We're going to try and keep it to an hour. I don't see that being too much of an issue.
No, we should be able to finish this up by 3. So just at a very high level, I'm going to try and add in some practical real world advice and use cases here. But if there's any specific questions on the call, or if somebody's already passed a certain part, or has already implemented some of the things that I've been talking about, or has issues with anything else, just mention it on this call, and we can walk through it. Yeah, do you want to cover the high level agenda?
Yeah. So again, the overarching topic here is just establishing an information security program. We outlined 4 key elements. It's not all encompassing, but they're the main points that really just need to be considered right now. So from senior management support, policy standards and procedures, establishing and managing frameworks, and finishing up with reporting and measuring success.
Cool. Thanks, Dan. Right. So in terms of an information security program, I mean, here's the high level definition of it. I mean, organizations, they often struggle with different challenges that come up throughout the year, throughout the day. Things are changing quite rapidly in this space. I mean, we see it on a day-to-day basis, and what an information security program is supposed to be able to adapt to those ever-changing environments and be able to keep the organization to an acceptable risk tolerance. And that's that's essentially what the information security program is for. So just to reiterate a couple of the high level items that we're going to cover off in today's agenda is going to be the senior management support. So this is basically getting buy-in from the C-suite or the board, and how you approach building an information security program from the top down. How you can build out policy standards and procedures, and how you can establish an effective information security management system, and then how you can report and measure success. And by doing these 4, you should be able to build a baseline of an information security program that will allow you to start scaling and making it more robust. Okay, so the first part is senior management support. So the objectives and activities of information security should be aligned with the overall business objectives. Senior management must take charge of this and provide visibility to support and commitment to do so. Must understand that. So essentially, I mean, what you want to do is information security must be seen as a business enabler, not a prohibitor, and often, information security is a cost center until a breach or an incident happens, and then that's quantifiable. But until that occurs, it is a cost center. So making senior management aware of what the responsibilities of the information security team, the compliance team, and to be able to understand their risk as an organization is really what the main responsibility of the information security team is, and that's what they should be reporting up to the senior management. So why should senior management care? In order to build an effective information security program, the information security requirements must come from the top. you can't build an effective information security program from the bottom. It's just not possible. You have to get buy-in from the board or the C-suite, and in order to do that, you have to be able to give them. Well, I'll touch on that in a second, but if you get buy-in from the top, you'll build stronger culture and boost the overall mindset of the organization. You'll also be able to get financial support for the technology people and processes. And that's once management buys in, you can then start talking to different departments about it, getting people excited about it, pulling in people from different departments like compliance, HR, finance. I've found has been very successful in my day-to-day information security roles, as those people often share commonality about keeping structure and support of the business running. And if they buy in, it's easier to build culture and boost mindset around information security, and explain to people what it is that you're actually doing and why you're doing it. And as a result of that, it's easier to attract better and more qualified candidates because the business is bought in, and that's something that is really attractive to prospects. And then finally, if you have management buy-in and you know where you've got a budget and you got buy-in and you know what you're doing and what you should be working on, it's pretty. It becomes a lot easier to be able to adapt to ever-changing requirements of the industry. So some of the things that I would just start off with, I don't know, I assume most of you have been to new roles where you've come into a new information security role or position. But some of the things that I start off with is just asking, is information security is part of the board meetings? And if so, how is it part of that board? Is it a slide? Is it every quarter? Is it CISO's invited? Is the CISO a formal member? I mean, if the organization has a CISO. And my next question would be, well, if that's not the case, can a CISO join, or can another person join from the board meeting to understand the type of topics that are discussed, what the format of the board meetings are like, in order to be able to potentially share something with them in the future. Off the back of that, I think it's important to create some key performance indicators that can be shared with the C-suite and board members, especially if the second point has been achieved. So if you know what the format that they're looking to, the expected format that they are looking for, it's usually one slide. It's very high level, but at least you know what they're, what they care about. So it's easier to put that together for them. Another really easy way to get visibility across the board in the C-suite is perform a gap analysis. And that could be as simple as taking something like an ISO 27001 gap assessment, or like a NIST CSF gap assessment, and just running it on yourself at a high level and just pointing out where you think the holes are, and then being able to quantify that to the board or C-suite, I think would be very valuable. And the last thing is share trends and industry benchmarks. So there's at the end of this deck, we included a whole bunch of links to sites and resources, and some of them are literally trends and industry benchmarks across different verticals. So whatever industry you're in, you can potentially highlight this. This other organization does something similar to us. They're the same size, they operate in the same areas, they've experienced these breaches. This is actually what it's resulted for them in terms of a monetary loss, or reputational risk. And that's a really easy way of being able to put that together and presenting that to the board or C-suite to start getting them to care about the information security space.
Stas, you bring up a good point, because something that I often think about is the challenges for a security professional that is looking to implement some security measures within an organization that maybe hasn't experienced a breach yet, or hasn't been hacked yet, or had a major issue. So those last two seem like great ways to try and get some buy-in.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the risk landscape has definitely shifted here, that it's assume breach, not prevent breach. But it's still, if you can prevent breach, that's what you want to be doing. And getting people to actually buy. There he is. Getting people to actually buy into what you're doing and what your plan is the best way to prevent breach. Because if you've got buy-in, then you know exactly where you stand in the organization, what your budget looks like, what the resources you have to be able to help the organization. And as long as you're not seen as a barrier as an enabler, you know, you should be pretty effective.
Yeah, very good.
So that was a bit of a ramble, and this is perfect timing. Dan.
Yeah. Hey everyone.
Perfect.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Right. I guess I'll just start off with introducing myself, and then we can jump on to security policy. So my name is Danny Alves. I've been working for Compile for over 2.5 years now. And before that, I actually spent almost my entire career working for Big Four consultancies, helping clients, you know, establishing information security programs, frameworks, maintaining them, and actually improving them. Stas, you already talked about senior management support. So
Yep.
Let's talk about policy standards and procedures. Once you have established your management support, you need to start documenting out your requirements. And the best way to do that is set up your governance of documentation, like policy standards and procedures. These documents are different levels. They have different target audience, but ultimately they have the same goal, which is to establish the rules and requirements across the organization, and they actually establish the requirements to protect the organizational assets. If we jump on to the next slide, then so these are basically policies, procedures, all of the documents. We can even talk about guidelines, which are not mandatory. So that's the difference to the policy standards and procedures. They reflect the organization's overall commitment to information security. And actually, if we want to put this into a real world scenario, one of the best ways to actually reflect senior management buy-in is to keep security policies up to date. If there are any changes, then reflect those changes throughout the hierarchy of these documents, because there's a hierarchy, and then actually approve them on at least a yearly basis, or if anything happens to the business or the control environment. These policies actually establish and enforce the security requirements, not only for one geographical location, but obviously across the whole organization. Therefore, actually developing these documents, maintaining them is a very challenging task. And I think, Stas, you and I, we both have our fair share of helping out clients and guiding them through drafting these policies, even just having them review and aligning them to their risk appetite. That's an extremely challenging task. They provide not only the what, but also the how and when of these requirements. If we go on to the next slide, then we will see why these documents are very important and actually how to write them. So policy standards and procedures, they all have their own purpose and their own place in the organization. So policies should be very high level. They should actually, in an ideal world, never change. And standards and procedures, which actually detail out more of like how the requirements in policies should be complied with, should change if there are any changes to the control environment. The reason of these documents and the reason why they should be clear and very plain in terms of the language that they have written is that these documents, they actually set out the boundaries of what's allowed and what's not throughout the organization. So these documents can be used for disciplinary actions or legal proceedings. Therefore, it's very important that they are not only written in a plain and clear language, but they are available to all employees across the organization. These policies, these documents, they have their own hierarchy. So policy, standards, procedures, they are all interconnected. Therefore, when writing them, these hierarchies should be kept. And when a policy requirement is set out, that should be set out also in the standard. and then also it should be set out in the procedure. That's where you have on the policy level the what, in the standard level the how, and the procedure level like when. Yeah. I think that's all for policies and standards. I don't know if Stas, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I was just going to touch on that as well. So like a lot of companies that we work with, they're either just starting off with policies, or they have some, but they're not sure when they were last updated or who last updated them or what they really say. So generally, like a good rule of thumb is potentially starting with an AEP or an acceptable use policy and then working your way backwards. And just outlining on a very high level, like 2 pages, like what are the most important things that you don't want your end users and your users, sorry, what your end users, what you don't want them to do in the organization, and kind of work your way backwards. That's usually a really good way of just really capturing the stuff that's really important and top of mind, and then working your way backwards on the other policies. I think it's also important to, if you can, get a standard set of policies. There are some on the internet. We'll provide a link at the end of this as well to an AEP and some other standard policies that can be taken. But those policies are, you know, they're drafted. They follow a clear pattern, but most importantly, they don't mix up what policy standards and procedures are. Like the amount of places that I've been into where organizations mix policy standards and procedures together and they don't really understand what the hierarchy is and why it's for. Like the best way to describe this, like a policy shouldn't be changing more than once a year, and if it does, there's a major change in the organization, so those should be PDFs. But for things like standards and procedures, those should be living on, you know, like SharePoint or Confluence or a place where they're easily accessible and easily reviewed, but being used by the business actively and being updated by the business actively. Like that's the ideal standard. Anyways, just my 2 cents. Oh, it's my turn again. So establish frameworks. So ISMS is Information Security Management System. So it's a relatively new term. It's coined by the ISO. So what this is basically a list of items that need to be followed by the organization, and by who, by when, and when it needs to be completed by, how often it needs to happen, and then what good looks like, and what framework that particular control is or management item is linked to, and any corresponding evidence. So at a very high level, it's a to-do list, but it's more difficult than it sounds to put together, and I'm just going to kind of demystify this a bit. So the ISMS, like I said, it's a document of best practices and controls across the organization. So what you want to do is you want to use plain, simple language in terms of being able to explain what it is that you're trying to do. So, for example, if you need to do like user recertifications across your organization, you would have one item in there that would be called, you know, user access reviews. You'd then be able to put in who that task is assigned to, and then further break down that task in terms of being able to break out what systems and you know, what who's responsible for what, and be able to define what good looks like. The ISMS can be broken down in a couple different ways as well. So in terms of the control framework, so if you're using something like NIST guideline, that'd be a control framework, whereas ISO would be more of a program framework where it's more high level and company focused. And then you also have risk frameworks, which would sit over top of these as well. And the idea is that you would have a list of all the things that you need to do, and then a tag as to what each of those items is applicable for. So if your organization, if you're trying to adhere to NIST, but then you also have a SOC requirement, or like a SOC 2 requirement or ISO 27001 requirement, you can put all of that into an ISMS. So you'd have one line item that basically says user access reviews, that this applies to, you know, NIST 854, yeah, this control. in ISO it's under this, and for SOC it's under this, and then you tag all of that, and then all the evidence would be under one item that you complete, and then you'd be able to sync the evidence across different frameworks. Again, this is there's different types of frameworks in terms of voluntary or mandatory. Mandatory are things that have to be done, otherwise there's legal ramifications. So those would be regulatory frameworks. So things like HIPAA and CCPA and PCI and GDPR and SOX, not with the next cyber SOX. And then there'd be voluntary ones like ISO, SOC, and NIST. So they're all voluntary, but those would be the difference. But yeah, and this really does help you build an information security program. And in terms of like putting something together quickly, I mean, you can start off with an Excel sheet, right? You can start off with like, here are all the controls that I think I should be doing. Use the NIST CSF framework as a starting point, or and here's the control, here's who I think is responsible, here's how often I need it to run, here's what good looks like in terms of what I'm expecting to get delivered, and a way of tracking if that's actually being done or not. Just to even just get all of that onto one sheet is useful. Yeah,
and I think just one thing on the voluntary and mandatory frameworks. I think it's a very good thing that most of these frameworks are open source, and it actually also a good thing that you can actually define what, and you are actually aware of who the framework is mandatory for. So Stas, you actually mentioned the NIST framework. So the CSF, for example, the CSF is a mandatory framework for all federal government agencies, and it's a very good framework from perspective that it's high level, it's easy to report on, and many of the organizations, even the ones that we work with, we usually who are starting from scratch, we usually advise them to start up with CSF, because the high level requirement of those controls that it actually details out gives space to how to actually comply with those requirements. And from that perspective, I think or even from a client perspective, if something that is good enough for federal governmental agencies, why wouldn't that be good for any other startups or any other companies that would like to build up their program? So I think from that perspective, the open sourceness of these frameworks are pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to encourage adoption, right? The problem is that a lot of them are like, the NIST ones are the most straightforward ones in terms of like actually spelling out exactly what needs to be done. But the other ones are very, airy-fairy, like the SOC ones, right? I mean, they're not prescriptive at all. You literally make up what you want. And I think that's actually where some of the challenges come in, which kind of takes us to the next point. Like, so the regulatory ones tend to have more more descriptors in there, and in terms of what they're actually expecting. So we just did one for the New York bit license, so NYCR 500, I think. And anyways, we just did one for the bit license, also based on NIST, but it was pretty, it was pretty clear what needed to be done there. But that's definitely a regulatory one, versus in an ISMS, like you should be able to capture everything, and anything that's regulatory, anything that's internal. So anything that you need to do as a business. So examples like, review your financial statements on a quarterly basis, make sure that you're doing your board calls, like things that you just, setting a cadence for that you just should not be forgetting to do. Like you can put that all on an SMS as well. And then you can put all the stuff that's customer facing as well. So, I need to produce, I need to produce entitlement reports for some of my clients. I need to produce KPIs for my clients. I need to make sure that they're, we check in with them and their support metrics are, they're happy with them. So like all of this stuff should be documented on the ISMS. And again, you want to be using one high level item to capture all the requirements, and then tagging the relevant frameworks against those controls. In terms of time and resource constraints, so like once this is actually up off the ground, it's actually not very time consuming. The time consuming part is actually knowing how to put this together and being able, if you've never done it before, that's the time consuming part. But once it's actually up, it's actually a time saver, because you see everything that needs to be done in one single location and have a pretty quick gauge to see if it's actually being done and if it's being done well. Yeah, and then this just allows you to scale. So you have new requirements, new frameworks, new updates. This should allow you to scale pretty quickly, or scale your information security program.
Hey guys, let's just take a second to pause. Just curious if we have any questions, whether anyone wants to type them into the chat, or I can open up kind of the microphone if anyone had any specific questions that they wanted to speak to. Nobody yet.
No.
I think you guys are answering all the questions. Okay, I'll turn it back over.
Cool. Yeah.
Reporting. And I think when it comes to reporting, one of the key aspects of how, and just to tie back a little bit to frameworks, is that many times when you establish such a program, when you actually want to write those documents, when you establish your requirement, oftentimes it's asked how many resources you have. You need to do that, but in an ideal world, this shouldn't be a full-time job, right? So and reporting should be one of the best ways to actually justify how your program works. And when you don't have anyone who is like a full-time, in terms of like having a full-time employee just doing your ISMS, you would have your point in time assessments of measuring your program. And that's what's really reporting is about, that what sort of assessments you have in place, how you can ensure that what is the value added to the investment to senior management. My experience is that when it comes to senior management, when you want to get their buy-in, when you actually want to keep the buy-in and their awareness, then I think many times management wants to see tangible results, right? So if you want to achieve a certification, then at the end of your roadmap, you achieve the certification. So that's something which is very tangible. If your long-term goal is not something like certification, how you ensure that you actually do that type of value-added feedback to senior management, and that would be reporting. Oftentimes, cybersecurity becomes a topic for senior management when something has already happened. If we want to put that into a real case scenario, the Uber hack is just a perfect example. I'm pretty sure you all have seen those job postings from Uber that has already become a meme on social media, that they are looking for senior engineers, they're looking for forensic analysts, they're looking for threat detection analysts, just right after the hack has happened. But basically, how you can ensure that this is something that is constantly reported back to management is something which is very, very difficult, because oftentimes the board is not very competent about what cybersecurity is. So then if we jump on to the next slide, then we can pretty much just touch base on why reporting would be important. Because when you establish your program, that's good, that's great, you manage to implement something, but how you can actually maintain it, how you can measure the effectiveness of it, and whether it's successful, it's a completely different ballgame. Reporting is there to ensure the overall performance of the program. It helps to measure the effectiveness of it. It helps management to make informed decision on next steps, on investments. You are actually providing that feedback for yourself from a perspective that you want to get better buy-in from management for your roadmap, for your investment. It helps prioritize risk and initiatives. And in order to do that, so then if you jump onto the next slide, how you want to make sure that the board actually understands what you want to convey to them. So you need to set up different kind of committees. You need to discuss operational risk. You need to discuss security risk. You need to discuss business risk. You have to set up all of these risk committees. People have to talk to each other, and you should have your CISO or CIO who brings this to the table when it comes to a board meeting. You should establish your baseline reporting templates. You should be consistent when it comes to board reporting. You shouldn't just come up with different kind of templates. Consistency is great because they will know what to look for. You have to materialize all of those what you're reporting, but if it's applicable, you can put into financial numbers just so that they understand what we're talking about. You have to use KPIs and risk indicators. These are very good indicators of just not only measuring the effectiveness of your program, but you can use this to actually compare yourself to the industry. There are a lot of websites, open source websites, where you can find benchmarks based on industries, based on other kind of factors, where it's not only about your competitors, but you can also measure yourself to the industry on a larger scale. And from that perspective, you can always give management a high-level overview of the performance of the program. And you can also include trends of how you're performing. I think one of the best ways to materialize or make it more tangible to senior management, their investment into cybersecurity, is to see where you started off and where you are now. If you're able to compare that to other industry players, then that's very good. But you can use, as we talked about, different kind of frameworks. You can use the CSF or other frameworks where you can just simply use, or even the CMMI frameworks, to actually just measure yourself to where you started off. And that's already something that provides a very good value-added feedback to management that their investment is paying off.
Yeah, and like a lot of this stuff, like it seems really daunting when you're first starting off, but like getting something together up off the ground, like a risk committee, doesn't have to be anything too formal. You can literally just get some like-minded people in a room together and just talk about what risks they're seeing across their departments or across their their teams. And most people are pretty willing to share what their experience is and where they think the gaps are, and then just documenting those and being able to put some tangible putting some tangible ways of mitigating that risk together. Like, even if it's like, today we're doing this, tomorrow we're going to do this, and like our goal by the end of the year is to do this, like, just as long as that's consistent, like that's enough to get going. Yeah, at least my experience has been like that.
That's great.
Cool. So this is just a summary. So in terms of this is just putting together the very fundamentals of an information security program. So again, senior management buy-in, you have to get that. You have to be able to get them to buy into the overall vision and why it's important to build out a information security program and to make this successful.
Yeah, and in order to make it successful and just set out the ground rules, you need to establish documentation, policy, standards, procedures that actually gives you the overall framework of what's allowed and what's not, and they pretty much basically support, the overall organizational and business goals.
And then from there, you can take those and then you can put those into an information security management system, because now you've established the policies, standards and procedures. Even if you just have the policies, you can at least start writing down what you should be doing as an organization.
Yeah, and from that point, you need to establish reporting and measure your success. Obviously, as we just talked about it, implementing something is not enough. You have to make sure that it's successful, it's effective. So you need to set out your standardized reporting and measurements, how you will be able to provide value-added feedback and reporting to senior management.
That's great. Man, you guys make it seem so easy.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Well, a lot of good stuff. I think that all of this, what I love about this conversation was it's all applicable, it's industry agnostic. This isn't tailored. It's kind of a broad stroke on a way to approach a proper information security program. And as we enter Q4 of 2022, and organizations are starting to think about Q1 of next year already, I think now is a great time to really start right at the top, begin the drumbeat for senior management buy-in, explain to them and show them through whether it's through a gap analysis or industry benchmarks, why maybe an investment into a information security program or strengthening the program is important.
Yeah, and all this stuff can be done all of this particular stuff can be stood up pretty quickly if you have the if you have the right the right expertise and people in place. But you don't need to do that all yourself. You can find people that have done this before to help you with all of this.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate both of you and sharing your time and your knowledge with us. Daniel and Stas shared these resources that I am going to email out to everyone today. Stas, maybe you want to.
Yeah, sure. So this is just some stuff that I've come across that I find really useful. So some of the daily easy reads on the left hand side are just like high level things that are happening in the information security space. They're updated daily. The first one, the security affairs one, I find really useful. It's really comprehensive. It's updated daily. It's just a tidbit about what's going on in the industry. All of the other daily reads, you can actually get our RSS feeds going on those, so you can get updated. Otherwise, Twitter is an excellent source for these as well. If you start following them, you'll be inundated very shortly. Some of the more advanced reads, so the latest hacking news, it's more technical analysis, and the same thing with the drift report. This is really interesting if you really want to get down to the brass tacks of everything. It actually shows you how certain exploits have taken place, what tools were used, and things like that. So I think the Uber was Slack phishing, but I think that's already up there as well in terms of how they breached it. But it's, if you want to get down to the nitty gritty, that's where you want to go. Some of the other stuff is just like the impress your friend stuff. So those are just those are dashboards about what you can see in real time, what companies are, reporting breaches or, and just a general dashboard of what's going on in the industry, the overall threat landscape across the world, who's reporting what. It looks cool, so you can have it up, but it is actually useful if you're in the space day to day. And the last one is on the weekly daily podcast. Some of the most accessible ones are definitely like Darknet Diaries. It's not very technical. It's explained to you like a 5-year-old, and it's actually quite entertaining. Like Jack Resider is he's a good speaker. The stories are interesting. It's not dry at all. The other ones are a bit more dry, but it saves you the read.
That's great. Yeah, this is all good stuff. So before we wrap this up, again, I'm going to open it up to any questions that anyone has, but you can expect to receive an email from me, including these resources. I'll copy Stas and Daniel on the email. That way, everyone that is here will have their email if you have any questions, if you want to follow up with them. And from that point, Stas, Daniel, any final remarks?
No,
I'm good. Thanks everyone for attending. This was great.
Yeah, this was great. I appreciate you guys and your time. Hope everyone has a great day.